The first person to tell me about my grandfather's 80th birthday party was a caterer I'd never met. She called me at 10:17 on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing a hospital renovation estimate and said, "Hi, Dana. This is Kelsey from Pine and Ash. I just need your approval before we run the remaining $6,200 on the visa ending in 4408. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at it. For what? There was a pause. Papers moved on her end. Walter Holloway's birthday. At Riverglass Lodge? This Saturday. My grandfather is Walter Holloway. The visa ending in 4408 was mine. And until that exact moment, I didn't know there was a party. Kelsey must have heard something change in my voice, because hers got careful. Your mother said you were handling the family card. My mother said that? Janice. Yes. She said you approved the updated guest count. I asked her not to charge anything else. Then I logged into my credit card account. What I found wasn't one charge. It was 11. Every single one had the word deposit in the description. $3,000 to Riverglass Lodge. $2,850 to Pine and Ash Catering. $1,200 to a cover band called Static Age. A photographer. A shuttle company. A florist. A custom cake studio. A hotel block guarantee. $480 to a sign company for something called a heritage display. The total was $17,916. All charged over 6 weeks. All for a party my parents had planned without me. I found the invitation 20 minutes later on my cousin's Facebook page. There were going to be 96 guests, an open bar, live music, and a slideshow called 80 Years of Walter Holloway. The invitation used an old photograph taken in front of Holloway hardware. Grandpa stood in the middle. My dad was on one side, my younger brother Evan on the other. I knew the original picture. I was standing beside Grandpa too. They'd cropped me out. When I called my mother, she didn't deny any of it. She sighed like I was calling to complain about a late package. Dana, we were going to explain. Explain which part? The party, the card, or the fact that you photoshopped me out of the family. It wasn't Photoshop. The invitation company needed a horizontal image. Even then, in the middle of everything, I almost laughed. My family could make a betrayal sound like a formatting issue. Then Mom said the sentence that kept me awake for the next 3 nights. Grandpa asked us not to invite you. I didn't believe her. Then she added, but that doesn't mean you get to ruin his birthday. That was the first time I understood what they expected from me. I was supposed to pay for the table, stay out of the photograph, and be grateful they'd found a use for my name. What I didn't understand, yet was why the first deposit on my card had been charged less than 2 hours after Grandpa handed my father a $23,000 check. Or why my father had told Grandpa that I was the one organizing the party. Or why the custom sign I'd paid for didn't actually say, "Happy Birthday." If you've ever been the dependable person in a family that somehow becomes invisible the second the work is done, you already know why I didn't hang up on my mother right away. I wish I had. I didn't. I'm 45 years old, and I live in Spokane, Washington, with my 17-year-old daughter, Rowan. I'm a senior cost estimator for a commercial construction company. Hospitals, schools, municipal buildings. Anything with enough moving parts that a small mistake can become an expensive one. My job is basically to look at a beautiful set of plans and ask what everybody forgot. That way of thinking doesn't turn off when I leave work. I notice gaps. I notice dates. I notice when 3 invoices use the same vague description. I notice when somebody says around 10,000, because the real number is 12,463. My family has benefited from that for most of my life. Holloway Hardware sits 40 minutes east of Spokane in Post Falls, Idaho. Grandpa opened it in 1976 in a building that used to be a feed store. It had uneven wood floors, a bell over the door, and an inventory system that lived mostly inside Grandpa's head. When I was 12, he gave me a brass key to the back entrance. It was an old-fashioned thing, longer and heavier than a regular house key, stamped with a tiny H on the round part at the top. Grandpa threaded it onto a piece of red cord, so I wouldn't lose it. A key means somebody trusts you after closing, he told me. I took that more seriously than most 12-year-olds take anything. Every Saturday, I swept sawdust from the lumber aisle, restocked plumbing washers, and counted the register with him. At closing, Grandpa would drink coffee out of a chipped mug and make me do the math in my head. My dad, Tom, grew up in that store. He officially took over day-to-day operations when Grandpa turned 65. My mother handled payroll, community events, and what she called relationships, which mostly meant she remembered who had a sick spouse and who owned property near the highway. Evan was 6 years younger than me. He was funny, charming, and allergic to the kind of task that couldn't be improved by talking. Customers loved him. He could sell a snowblower during a mild winter. He could also forget to order the snowblowers until the first storm. That was where I came in. In our family, there was a saying, "Whoever can carry it, carries it." Grandpa first used it about freight. If one person could lift a box safely, that person lifted it. If they couldn't, they asked for help. It was practical. It kept people from showing off and getting hurt. My parents turned it into a family operating system. Evan was creative, so he shouldn't be buried in details. Dad had blood pressure problems, so he shouldn't be stressed. Mom was keeping everybody connected, so she couldn't be expected to manage the numbers too. Grandpa had already worked his whole life. I could carry it, so I did. At 19, I took a semester off community college after Dad had back surgery because the store's inventory conversion was only supposed to take a few weeks. It took 4 months. Nobody forced me. That part matters. They asked, and I said yes before they'd finished asking. At 27, I put $8,200 on a zero-interest credit card when the store came up short on sales tax. Dad promised I'd have it back by Christmas. I got $6,000 by the following May and was told the rest had probably been covered through all the little things my parents had done for me. At 33, when they expanded into contractor supply, I spent 5 weekends building the cost model. Evan presented it to the bank. There's a photograph of the loan closing on the store website. Evan is shaking hands with the lender. My spreadsheet is open on the laptop in front of him. At 39, 6 weeks after my divorce was final, my father asked me to guarantee a line of credit. That time I said no. He didn't yell. Dad rarely yelled. He just looked at me across my kitchen island and said, "I guess I thought you still cared what happens to the place." I spent the next 3 days feeling guilty for protecting the only house Rowan and I had. That's embarrassing to admit, but it's true. My survival belief was simple. If I became the person they couldn't do without, I would never become the person they could leave out. For a long time, it almost looked like love. My parents called me first in a crisis. They praised me to customers. Mom introduced me as our numbers brain. Dad kept a desk for me in the back office, even though I hadn't worked there full-time in 20 years. But when there wasn't a crisis, they didn't call much. When I got promoted, Mom sent a thumbs-up emoji and asked whether my new salary meant I could help with Grandpa's roof. When Rowan won a statewide debate competition, Dad missed the final because Evan needed him at a contractor expo. When I bought my house, my parents came to the closing but left before dinner because a delivery at the store had arrived damaged. I told myself they relied on me because they respected me. The truth was less flattering. They relied on me because I had trained them to believe I would absorb the cost. The birthday party was simply the first time they expected me to absorb it from outside the room. After I got off the phone with Mom, I called the number on the back of my visa. The fraud representative, a man named Andre, asked whether I'd ever given my card information to either of my parents. I had. 9 months earlier, a pipe had burst in the apartment over the hardware store. Dad was at the emergency room with Grandpa. Evan was in Boise, and Mom couldn't find the store's business card. I'd paid the restoration company's $2,500 emergency deposit over the phone. The store reimbursed me 4 days later. Mom had apparently written down the number. Andre froze the account, canceled the card, and opened disputes on all 11 charges. He explained that the investigation would take time because I had a prior financial relationship with the merchant's customer, my family, even though I hadn't authorized these particular purchases. "Do you want us to block any pending transactions?" he asked. I looked at the note I'd made from Kelsey's call. $6,200. Final catering payment. "Yes," I said. My hand shook after I hung up. Not during the call. After. That's how my body tends to handle things. I can negotiate a 7-figure change order without raising my voice, then sit in my car 20 minutes later and realize I've been clenching my jaw hard enough to get a headache. I called every vendor on the statement. I didn't cancel the party. I want to be clear about that. I told each business the same thing. My card had been used without my permission, I disputed the charge, and all future billing needed to go to the person who signed the contract. 9 of the 11 contracts were in my mother's name. The photographer's contract was in Evan's. The heritage display was in mine. The sign company emailed me a copy. The billing contact said Dana Holloway. The email address was danaholloway.familyevents@gmail.com. That wasn't my email address. The design attached to the contract had 3 black and white portraits arranged over the words. Holloway Hardware. 3 generations. 1 future. Grandpa. Dad. Evan. In smaller letters at the bottom, it said, "Celebrating Walter's 80th and the next chapter of a family legacy." I paid $480 for a 6-foot-tall announcement that erased me from the business I had been rescuing since I was 19. That detail didn't just hurt. It clarified something. This wasn't only a birthday party. My parents were using Grandpa's 80th birthday to announce Evan as the future of Holloway Hardware. I called Mom again. "What's the heritage display?" She went quiet. "It's just decor. It says 1 future." "Whose future?" "This isn't the time. Apparently Saturday is the time." She lowered her voice. I could picture her in the store's back office, turning toward the wall so nobody would hear. "Your brother has worked there for 15 years. And I've financed it for 26. You have your own career, Dana." There it was. The sentence underneath half my childhood. "You're fine. You don't need it. Somebody else needs it more." Did Grandpa really say he didn't want me there? I asked. Mom took too long. He said he didn't want tension. That wasn't an answer, and we both knew it. Put him on the phone. He's resting. At 11:30 in the morning? He's almost 80. My mother had started using Grandpa's age like a locked door. Any question she didn't want answered was suddenly bad for his health. I called his cell. It went to voicemail. I called his apartment. No answer. Then the family messages started. My Aunt Lisa wrote, "Please don't make Grandpa's birthday about old grudges." My cousin Nate asked why I'd canceled the caterer. My father sent one line. "Call me when you're ready to act like an adult." Evan called 6 times in 40 minutes. I let the first 5 go. I answered the 6th. "Are you out of your mind?" he said, without hello. "The venue says they need a new card by 5. Then give them yours." "I don't have a $20,000 limit." "Neither do I anymore." "Come on, Dana. It's Grandpa." "Exactly. Why wasn't I invited?" "That was Mom's call. The display is in your name." "What display?" His confusion sounded real, which annoyed me more than a lie would have. I emailed him the proof. He was silent long enough that I heard a forklift beeping behind him. "Okay," he said. "I knew they were doing something about the transition. I didn't know they used your name. Did you know they used my card? Mom said you offered to cover deposits until the store's quarter closed." Did that sound like me? Honestly? Yeah. That answer landed harder than I expected, because he wasn't being cruel. He was describing the person I had spent years becoming. "Well, I didn't," I said. "And I'm not. So what? Everybody loses their deposits." "They aren't my deposits. You know that isn't how it works." "It is exactly how credit cards work, Evan." He swore under his breath. "Dad's going to lose it." "Dad already lost it. He just put the loss in my name." That evening, Rowan found me at the kitchen table with vendor contracts spread around my laptop. She is observant in a way that can be uncomfortable when you're her mother. She has my habit of noticing what's missing, but she's less willing to pretend she didn't. "Is this Grandpa's party?" she asked. I nodded. "Are we going?" There are questions that make you angry and questions that make you tired. That one did both. "We weren't invited." She stood very still. "Neither of us?" "Neither of us." Rowan looked down at the contracts. "Then why is your card paying for it?" "It's not anymore." She pulled out a chair. "Did Grandpa not want us there?" "I don't know yet." She nodded once and went upstairs. 10 minutes later, I found a birthday card on the counter. She had bought it weeks earlier. On the envelope, in her careful handwriting, she'd written Grandpa Walt. Rowan had been setting aside money from her grocery store job to buy him a portable record player because he'd been talking about listening to his old jazz albums again. She hadn't asked whether there was a party. She assumed we would see him because we always saw him. That was when my anger changed shape. I could tolerate my family making me feel optional. I had years of practice. Watching them teach my daughter the same lesson was different. At 4:42 that afternoon, I opened the venue's payment portal. I wish I could tell you I was only checking it. I wasn't. I had another card in my wallet with enough available credit to keep the whole thing alive. I entered the number. I filled in the expiration date. I got as far as the 3 digits on the back. All I had to do was press submit. My brain supplied every excuse. Grandpa only turns 80 once. The vendors aren't responsible. You can sort the money out later. Don't embarrass the family. Whoever can carry it, carries it. Then Rowan came back downstairs for water. She looked at my screen and asked, "Would they have told you about the party if that card hadn't declined?" I closed the laptop. That was my first real boundary. No speech. No dramatic announcement. I simply didn't press the button. By 6 o'clock, Riverglass had suspended the reservation. The caterer reduced the head count until a new payment method could be provided. The band released the date. The hotel canceled the guaranteed block, but kept the rooms individual guests had already booked. My mother sent a message to the entire family saying I had pulled funding at the last minute due to unresolved jealousy toward Evan. Not one word about how the funding got there. My father finally called at 7:13. "You're humiliating your grandfather," he said. "Did he ask you to use my card? That is not the issue." "It's my issue. We were going to pay you back after inventory season." "With what?" He exhaled. "This is why your mother didn't want you at the party. You turn everything into an audit. When $17,000 disappears, an audit is a pretty normal response." Nothing disappeared. "It went to your grandfather." "Then let me talk to him. He doesn't need this stress." "Did Grandpa say he didn't want me invited?" Dad paused. Then he said he didn't want conflict at his birthday. My parents had now given me two versions of the same non-answer. I said, "I'm not paying another $1." Dad's voice went flat. "After everything this family has done for you?" I looked around the kitchen I had bought without their help, at the bills I paid, at the birthday card my daughter might not get to deliver. "Send me a list," I said. He hung up. The next morning at 6:08, Grandpa called me. He didn't sound sick. He sounded furious. "Dana," he said, "why did your mother just tell me you canceled the birthday party you planned?" I sat up in bed. "I didn't plan a party. That's not what Tom said." "Dad said I planned it?" "He said you were handling the budget because you wanted to make up for Thanksgiving." Thanksgiving was the last time Grandpa and I had been in the same room for more than 20 minutes. He had sold his little lake cabin that fall. It wasn't a fancy place. One bedroom, a wood stove, dock boards that needed replacing every other summer. He'd owned it for 32 years. At dinner, he mentioned wanting to drive out and check the pipes before the first freeze. My father said, "Dad, you sold it in September." Grandpa stared at him. Then at my mother. I thought we were still discussing that. The table changed. That's the only way I can describe it. Everybody suddenly became very interested in passing food. I asked Grandpa whether he remembered signing the sale papers. Mom snapped, "Dana, stop interrogating him." Dad said the proceeds had gone into a safe income account for Grandpa's care. Evan told me later I had embarrassed an old man over something he probably forgot. Grandpa barely spoke to me for 2 months after that. I thought he was ashamed or angry. According to what he told me on the phone that morning, my parents had said I believed he was losing his mind and wanted control of his money. Meanwhile, they had told me he resented my questions. Two people can stand 10 feet apart for a long time if somebody keeps telling each of them the other one wants space. "Grandpa," I said, "did you ask them not to invite me?" "What?" "No. Did you ask them not to invite Rowan?" "Of course not. She's bringing that record machine." I closed my eyes. He already knew about the gift. Rowan had called him for model advice and made him promise to act surprised. "Your mother said you had a work thing in Portland," he continued. "She said you didn't want to fuss after Thanksgiving. I told her I wasn't having the party without you. Did you give Dad money for it?" Silence. Not a confused silence. A measuring silence. 23,000, he said. "Why? When?" "June 27th. I gave him a cashier's check at the store. The first venue deposit had hit my credit card on June 27th at 3:41 p.m. "What account did it come from?" I asked. "My regular savings." "Dana, what's going on?" I almost lied. The instinct arrived so fast it scared me. I wanted to say there was a billing mix-up. I wanted to protect his birthday, his pride, his opinion of my father. I wanted to do what my parents had done and decide the truth was too stressful for him. Instead, I said, "Mom and Dad put almost $18,000 in party deposits on my credit card. I wasn't invited. They told me you asked for that." Grandpa didn't speak for several seconds. Then he said very quietly, "Come over." He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a retirement community near the Spokane River. He'd moved there after my grandmother died, supposedly because he wanted less maintenance. His place wasn't sad or clinical. It looked like Grandpa, old jazz records, woodworking magazines, a recliner nobody else was allowed to adjust, and 3 jars of screws sorted by size on the kitchen counter for no apparent reason. When I arrived, he had his checkbook open on the table. He was still tall at 80, though his shoulders curved more than they used to. He wore khakis, a flannel shirt, and the expression he used to reserve for suppliers who tried to change a price after delivery. He pushed the carbon copy toward me. June 27th. $23,000. Memo. 80th birthday paid in full. I told your father I didn't want anybody spending their own money, he said. I wanted a good party, not a royal wedding. Did you approve an announcement about Evan taking over the store? His eyebrows pulled together. Evan isn't taking over the store. I showed him the sign design. He read it twice. The second time, he removed his glasses and cleaned them, which was something he did when the problem wasn't actually his vision. Tom said there'd be a small display about the store, he said. He didn't say this. Who owns Holloway Hardware right now? It sounded like a basic question. It wasn't. Grandpa owned the building and 35% of the operating company. Dad owned 40%. My mother owned 10%. Evan had 15%, which my parents had given him after he joined full-time. There's been talk of changing things, Grandpa said. Nothing has been signed. What kind of changes? Your father wanted my shares to go to Evan eventually. I said the two of you should be treated evenly. And what did Dad say? He said you'd already been compensated. I felt the room tilt just slightly. Compensated how? Consulting payments. Help with your divorce. Your house. Nobody helped me buy my house. Grandpa frowned. I gave them $18,000 for you when Mark left. My ex-husband, Mark, left when Rowan was 11. He emptied our joint savings account on his way out, though I eventually recovered part of it in the settlement. During that first awful month, Dad gave me a check for $6,000. He said it was all my parents could afford. I paid it back within a year. Grandpa had given them 18. Did Dad tell you I received all of that? He said it kept you in the house. I sold that house. I moved into a rental. I paid Dad back $6,000. Grandpa sat down slowly. I hated the look on his face. Not because he seemed old, because he suddenly looked like a man reviewing a deal and realizing everybody else had seen a different contract. The contractor supply expansion, he said. You were supposed to have a piece of that. I built the cost model for free. I put in $25,000 because Tom said it would buy your interest. I don't have an interest. He looked toward the window. Your father told me you didn't want your name tied to the store. I wanted to call Dad right then. Grandpa stopped me. Not yet, he said. Why? Because once people know you're looking, they start cleaning. That was the first thing anyone had said in 2 days that made me smile. He noticed the brass key on my key ring when I reached for my phone. I had stopped wearing it on red cord decades earlier, but I'd never taken it off completely. That old thing doesn't open the store anymore, he said. I know. Dad had replaced the back door after a break-in in 2008. He gave Evan a new key. Nobody remembered to give me one. I kept the old one anyway. Grandpa touched it with one finger. Funny what we hang on to. At 8:30 that morning, he called Monique Alvarez. Monique had kept the hardware store's books for 28 years. She was 61, wore bright reading glasses on a chain, and still printed monthly reports because she didn't trust software updates with anything I can't recreate using a pencil. She arrived at Grandpa's apartment carrying a grocery tote, not a binder. Inside were 2 flash drives, a yellow legal pad, and a paper deposit slip from June 27th. I figured one of you would call, she said. That sentence made the hair rise on my arms. Why? I asked. She looked at Grandpa. Because Tom asked me yesterday to move your birthday check out of owner contributions and classify it as event reimbursement. Reimbursement to who? That's the problem. There was no event expense in the store account. The $23,000 had been deposited at 1:52 p.m. At 2:16, the store sent $17,600 to Northline Capital, a high-interest lender I had never heard of. The remaining money covered 2 weeks of overdue supplier invoices. My parents hadn't used Grandpa's money for his party. They'd used it to keep the store's financial trouble hidden. Then they put the party on my credit card to keep Grandpa from finding out. I thought that was the whole reveal. It wasn't even close. Monique opened her laptop. Dana, she said, how many times have you loaned the store money? I gave her the rough number. 6 significant advances over about 17 years, plus smaller charges and unpaid work. And how much did they repay? Most of it. Eventually, she turned the screen toward me. I don't think they did. She had created a timeline. In 2009, when I put $8,200 on my card for the sales tax shortage, Grandpa transferred $10,000 to the store 5 days later. Dad repaid me $6,000 and left the rest on my card. In 2014, when I paid $12,000 for emergency roof repairs, Grandpa transferred $14,000 with the memo Dana/store roof. My parents repaid me $9,000. In 2018, I covered a $21,000 inventory order after a bank delay. 2 days later, Grandpa moved $25,000 from a certificate of deposit. I received $18,000 over the following 4 months. Every time I carried the gap, Grandpa had already sent enough money to close it. Sometimes more than enough. My parents had been using the same crisis twice. They told me Grandpa couldn't help, so I needed to step in. They told Grandpa I had stepped in as an owner, so he needed to fund my stake. Then they kept a portion from both sides inside the business. It was clever in the ugliest possible way. Not one dramatic theft. Not one suitcase of cash. Just years of small differences, vague explanations, delayed repayments, and 2 people who trusted the same middleman more than they trusted each other. How much? Grandpa asked. Monique didn't soften it. From you that I can trace? $114,000 over 11 years. From Dana, about $61,000 in advances, not counting unpaid services. Some was repaid. Some wasn't. Some got recorded as gifts. Grandpa stared at the yellow pad. Tom said she was building equity. Monique shook her head. There's no equity in Dana's name. That was the second-layer truth. My parents hadn't simply favored Evan. They had financed his future by selling Grandpa a version of mine that didn't exist. And every time I asked why I wasn't included, they used my independence as proof that I didn't need to be. I wish I could say I became instantly decisive after that. I didn't. I cried in Grandpa's bathroom with the faucet running because I didn't want him to hear me. Not over the $61,000, exactly. Money can be counted. Money can be disputed. Some of it can be recovered, and some of it becomes an expensive education. I cried over all the conversations I had misunderstood. The Christmas Grandpa barely looked at me after the contractor expansion. The awkward silence when I mentioned needing a cheaper apartment during my divorce. The way he stopped asking me about the store because he believed I had taken money and walked away from it. My parents hadn't only moved dollars between us. They had moved blame. When I came out, Grandpa was standing at the kitchen counter with his hands flat against it. You should have asked me, he said. For one defensive second, I wanted to tell him he should have asked me too. Then I realized that was true. Yeah, I said. I should have. He nodded. Me too. That was the first honest apology I received in this entire story. 8 words. No explanation attached. Monique gave us copies of the timeline and told us she would speak to an independent accountant if Grandpa wanted a formal review. She also admitted she had known things didn't add up for years. Why didn't you tell us? I asked. Her mouth tightened. Because Tom signs my paycheck and because every questionable transaction had a story. Your grandfather was helping the business. You were helping the business. Vendors were being paid. Employees kept their jobs. Nothing looked like one big crime. It looked like a family making messy choices. She looked at Grandpa. Then the stories stopped matching. Explanation wasn't absolution, but I understood her. That's how systems like ours survive. Each individual moment is just plausible enough to excuse. Only the timeline looks outrageous. Grandpa called his attorney from the apartment. Not the lawyer Dad used for the store. A different one. He asked for copies of the operating agreement, the building lease, and anything related to transferring his shares. Then he said, "Nobody is signing anything at my birthday party." That was how we learned there had, in fact, been something to sign. His attorney had received a succession acknowledgement from Dad 2 weeks earlier. It was presented as a non-binding statement of Grandpa's wishes. In ordinary language, it said Grandpa supported Evan becoming controlling owner. Attached to it was an option allowing Evan to buy Grandpa's shares over 10 years at a value set 4 years earlier. That value didn't include the building, but the party announcement made it sound like the entire legacy was moving in one direction. Grandpa had not approved the document. Dad planned to put it in a leather presentation case and ask him to sign during what Mom described in an email as a warm family moment. Nothing creates warm family memories like a below-market purchase option hidden near a birthday cake. Grandpa canceled the appointment with that attorney's office and hired separate counsel. The lawyer told us not to assume the document was enforceable or fraudulent until she reviewed it. She also told Grandpa not to discuss details in group texts, which was excellent legal advice and completely incompatible with my mother's communication style. By noon, Mom had sent 27 messages. At first she minimized. The birthday check was temporarily used for cash flow. Then she love-bombed. You know how much we value everything you do. Then she rewrote. You agreed years ago that family expenses were shared. Then she recruited. Aunt Lisa called Grandpa and said I was taking advantage of his confusion. Cousin Nate posted something vague online about greed showing up when inheritance gets close. A family friend I hadn't spoken to since 2019 sent me a prayer hand emoji and the words, "Choose grace." Grace, I discovered, is what people recommend when they want the injured person to become convenient again. Dad came to my house that evening. He didn't knock. He tried his old key, which no longer worked because I'd changed the locks after my divorce. Then he knocked like the door had personally insulted him. Rowan was at work. I was grateful for that. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me. Dad looked older than he had 2 days earlier. He'd worn the same Navy store polo he wore 6 days a week. There was a pen mark near the pocket and gray dust on one shoulder. You brought Monique into this, he said. You brought Monique into it when you asked her to change the check. He looked toward my neighbor's house. Can we go inside? No. That surprised both of us. Your grandfather is upset, he said. He should be. You're feeding him numbers without context. Give me the context. Dad rubbed the bridge of his nose. The store nearly failed 3 times. Do you understand that? Not had a bad month. Failed. Gone. 40 years of your grandfather's life, 15 employees, the building, everything. So you used his money. He gave money to the business. He gave $23,000 for his birthday. And the lender would have frozen our purchasing account if I hadn't made that payment. There would have been no store left to celebrate. In his mind, that probably made sense. Dad had been 22 when a regional chain opened 2 miles from Holloway Hardware. He watched Grandpa mortgage their house to keep the store alive. For my father, the business wasn't an asset. It was the family's proof that they had survived. Any money used to protect it became morally clean in his head. Why my card? I asked. We needed 30 days. You needed my permission. Your mother said you wouldn't mind. Did you ask her why she was so sure? He didn't answer. Why tell Grandpa I had equity? I wanted you to have equity. Wanting it isn't the same as giving it. Every time we tried to bring you closer, you had conditions. Conditions like seeing financial statements before guaranteeing debt? You always make it sound ugly. I'm repeating what happened. He stepped closer. Your brother stayed. You left. There it was, the real family rule. Evan could be unreliable inside the building and still count as loyal. I could rescue the building from 40 miles away and still count as gone. Then he can carry it, I said. Dad's face changed. What does that mean? It means no more cards. No more estimates. No more emergency loans. No more calls where you tell me one number and tell Grandpa another. I'm done. Whoever can carry it carries it. He said it like scripture. No, I said. Whoever agrees to carry it carries it. You forgot that part. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he asked the question that told me he still didn't understand. What will it take to get you back on board before Saturday? Not how do I make this right? Not what did this cost you? How much would it take to restore the machine? Nothing, I said. Dad left without saying goodbye. The next day, the credit card company issued a provisional credit for the 11 deposits. That didn't mean the vendors lost the money immediately. It meant their banks requested documentation, and my parents had to provide a legitimate payment method or risk cancellation and collection. Mom put part of the replacement total on her personal card. Dad used money from the store. Evan covered the photographer and cake. The band was already gone. Riverglass agreed to keep the reservation if the final bill was paid 48 hours before the event. The party shrank from 96 people to 64. The open bar became beer and wine. The shuttle company dropped out. According to my mother's version, I had stripped an old man's birthday down to folding chairs and tap water. According to the invoices, I had stopped paying for a jazz trio, premium bourbon favors, and a hotel suite my parents booked for themselves. Grandpa didn't care about any of that. He cared that his son had used him, his granddaughter, and the store as 3 different wallets. I cared too, but I also cared about Rowan. When she came home from work that night, she placed her grocery receipt beside her debit card and entered every item into an app. She'd done that for years. I used to think she was just responsible. Then I noticed she had highlighted the bottle of juice she bought on her break. "Why do you track food separately?" I asked. She shrugged. "So I know how much I cost when I'm not home." I felt sick. "What do you mean?" "It's not a big deal. You always have family stuff to cover. I don't want to be one more surprise expense." That was the bill I had never calculated. My daughter had watched me confuse love with financial emergency for so long that she'd started itemizing her own existence. I took the receipt from her hand. "You are not an expense I have to justify." She tried to joke. "Technically college." "Rowan." She looked at me. "You don't have to make yourself cheap to be easy to love." I wasn't only talking to her. For once I heard it too. That night I removed my parents as emergency contacts on the account I used for family expenses. I changed every shared password. I canceled the old store email forwarding that still sent vendor notices to me. I put a credit freeze on my file in Rowan's. Then I sent one message to my parents and Evan. Any future financial request must be in writing. I will not guarantee, advance, charge, sign, estimate, or cover anything for Holloway Hardware or any family event. Do not use my name as an approver, sponsor, or owner. Mom replied, "This is incredibly cold." I wrote back, "It's incredibly clear." Then Evan asked to meet me alone. We met at a diner near the state line where the coffee is good and the booths have been repaired with black tape. Evan arrived 15 minutes late, which for him counted as early. He looked exhausted. His hair was still wet, and his store polo was inside out under his jacket. He didn't notice until I pointed it out. "That feels about right," he said, and fixed it in the restroom. When he came back, he put his phone face down on the table. "How bad is it?" I asked. "The party or the store?" "The store." He leaned back. "Dad says we can recover by Christmas." That wasn't my question. Evan stared at the coffee the waitress had poured. 2 years earlier, he had launched an online contractor division. The idea itself wasn't ridiculous. Regional builders were struggling to source specialized hardware, and Evan believed the store could compete through personal service. The problem was that he ordered inventory based on potential demand, not actual purchase orders. Then freight prices rose, 2 large customers delayed projects, and a warehouse full of specialty hinges became a very expensive monument to optimism. Northline Capital had advanced the store money against future receivables. Their automatic withdrawals came every business day. If sales slowed, the percentage didn't care. "I told Dad to shut the division down in February," Evan said. "He said we just needed one good quarter." "Did Grandpa know?" "Dad said he knew enough." "Did you know Grandpa was sending money he thought would benefit me?" "No." I watched his face. "Did you know Mom used my card?" "Not until you sent the contracts." "Did you think I approved the succession announcement?" He took a breath. "I didn't think you cared." I laughed once, without humor. "That's convenient. I know how it sounds. It sounds like everybody decided I didn't care because asking me would have risked hearing no." He nodded. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I thought you were already getting paid." Dad had told him I billed the store for every estimate, vendor negotiation, and financial model. Evan believed Grandpa's transfers were payments to me. When he got 15% of the company, he assumed my consulting income was my chosen arrangement. "You drive a nicer car than I do," he said. "Your house is worth more." Dad always said you wanted cash, not headaches. My job pays me, Evan. I know that now. You could have asked. You could have asked why I was working 60-hour weeks in a store everybody says was handed to me. He had me there. Evan had benefited from the system. He had accepted 15% without asking what I received. He had let Mom turn my absence into agreement because it suited him. But he had also been lied to. My parents told each of us the version that kept us from comparing notes. I was the successful one who didn't need ownership. Evan was the loyal one who didn't need stable pay. Grandpa was the founder whose money had to protect his legacy. Mom and Dad stayed in the middle, translating everyone's sacrifices into business survival. "Did you sign anything for the transition?" I asked. "A letter of intent." "Do you have it?" He emailed it to me. The purchase price for Grandpa's shares was low. Worse, the agreement required the company to guarantee Evan's payments. In practical terms, Evan could buy control using the store's own future cash. Who valued the shares? I asked. Dad. Of course he did. Is it bad? It's generous if you're you. He rubbed both hands over his face. I didn't ask for this at a birthday party. But you were going to accept it at one. He didn't argue. That was one thing I appreciated about Evan that morning. He didn't manufacture innocence. He wasn't responsible for every lie, but he had enjoyed not looking too closely. Before we left, he said, "Dad thinks if the truth gets out, suppliers will panic." That may be true. 15 people could lose their jobs. That may be true too. So what are you going to do? I'm going to stop accepting responsibility for choices I wasn't allowed to make. Evan looked down at the table. That doesn't tell me what happens. I know. That's the part you all keep handing me. Grandpa's independent accountant began reviewing the store records on Thursday. At first, Dad refused access. Then Grandpa's attorney reminded him that a 35% owner had inspection rights under their agreement, and Dad became cooperative in the special way people do when the alternative has just been explained by counsel. The early findings were bad, but not theatrical. No offshore accounts. No sports cars. No secret second families. Just a business that had been underpriced, overextended, and protected from consequences by family money. The contractor division had lost $148,000 in 18 months. The store had deferred maintenance on its delivery trucks. Payroll taxes were current, thankfully, but several suppliers had tightened terms. Mom's event spending came from a marketing account that had no business hosting a private birthday. The good news was that the core store still made money. If the contractor division closed, the extra warehouse lease ended, and the high-interest advance was refinanced, Holloway Hardware might survive. The bad news was that it could no longer survive as a family myth. It needed real management, accurate reporting, and a limit on how much love could be converted into working capital. Grandpa told Dad there would be no share transfer. Not yet. He asked Evan to provide a complete inventory count. He told Mom she no longer had authority to move his money or speak for him. Dad blamed me for every one of those decisions. Mom blamed my tone. For the record, my tone was an email. Then Mom came to my office. She didn't sign in at reception. She waited near the elevators until I returned from a site meeting, wearing cream slacks and carrying a paper bag from my favorite bakery. I brought the lemon cookies, she said. The casserole had not arrived, but apparently the apology had a pastry phase. I took her to a small conference room because I didn't want my coworkers watching. She set the bag between us and folded her hands. "I'm sorry about the card." It was the first direct sentence she'd offered. "Why did you use it?" "I knew the store would reimburse you." "Why didn't you ask?" Her eyes filled with tears. My mother cries beautifully. No blotching, no runny nose. Even her grief understands presentation. "Because I knew you'd say no. Then you knew you didn't have permission. I knew you were angry. That isn't different." She looked away. "Your father has been carrying a lot. So have I. You handle things better." That sentence was supposed to flatter me. For years it had. Being able to survive something doesn't make it okay to do it to me. Mom wiped one tear from beneath her eye. "I was trying to give your grandfather one happy day. Your questions at Thanksgiving hurt him. You told him I thought he was incompetent. You were treating him like he was. I asked whether he knowingly sold a cabin. In front of everybody." That was the closest she came to explaining her internal logic. My mother believed appearance was a form of protection. If nobody named the fracture, the family remained whole. A public question was more dangerous than a private lie because other people could see it. "Why did you tell him I planned the party?" "He wanted you involved." "Why did you tell me he didn't want me there?" She didn't answer. I asked again. Finally she said, "Because when you and your grandfather compare notes, you both get stubborn." For the first time, she had described the actual threat. Not conflict. Comparison. She pushed the bakery bag toward me. "Your father wants us to meet at the store tonight. He has a proposal." "About what?" "Making you whole." I should have known nobody uses that phrase unless they're about to ask you to surrender something. The store was closed when I arrived at 7. The bell over the front door made the same thin sound it had made when I was a kid. Dad had left the plumbing aisle lights on, so half the building glowed and half sat in shadow. Mom, Dad, and Evan were waiting in the back office. For one strange second, I felt hopeful. That's the part I'm least proud of. I saw 4 chairs around the desk. 4. Not 3 chairs with me standing beside them. Not a request to fix something from home. A place had been made for me at the table. Dad slid a document across the desk. "We should have formalized your role years ago," he said. "The proposal gave me a 20% interest in Holloway Hardware. Dad would transfer 10%, Mom 5, and Evan 5. It included a title, Chief Financial and Development Officer, and a promise to reimburse all the disputed birthday charges within 90 days. It also acknowledged $36,000 in prior unreimbursed advances and converted them into a company note with interest. On the surface, it was almost everything I had wanted. Recognition, ownership, proof that my work counted. My brother and me side by side. Mom said, "We can put your portrait on the heritage display." The designer said there's time. Just like that, they could uncrop me. I read every page. Page 7 required all owners to personally guarantee the Northline refinance and any replacement credit facility. Page 9 said my interest would be forfeited if I stopped providing ongoing financial oversight during the first 5 years. Page 11 contained a broad release. If I signed, I agreed that all previous family and business transactions were resolved, that my parents had acted with my authorization, and that no misrepresentation had occurred. The final paragraph required all owners to protect the company from reputational harm, including public statements about internal finances. They weren't offering me a share of the family. They were offering the family a share of my credit. Who wrote this? I asked. Dad named the store's attorney. Does Grandpa know? Grandpa doesn't need to approve transfers from us, Mom said. He needs to approve the refinance. Dad leaned forward. Which he will if you support it. There it was. They needed me to calm Grandpa, guarantee the debt, protect the story, and stand in the photograph. In return, I would finally be allowed to claim part of the structure I had spent years holding up. If I sign this, I said, you'll tell the family the credit card was a misunderstanding. Mom nodded carefully. We all will. And if I don't, then the review continues, Dad said. The lender may pull out. Suppliers hear rumors. People lose jobs. Your grandfather spends his 80th birthday watching his life's work come apart. Evan looked at him. That's not all on her. Dad's head turned. Excuse me? You're making it sound like she created the loan. I'm saying she can help solve it. Of course she can, I said. That's the whole point. Dad spread his hands. Whoever can carry it. Stop saying that. My voice wasn't loud, but all three of them stopped. I touched the brass key on my ring under the desk. I remembered being 12 years old and believing a key meant trust. I remembered taking a semester off because useful daughters don't create inconvenience. I remembered the $6,000 divorce check I repaid while my parents kept the other 12. I remembered Rowan highlighting a bottle of juice so she could calculate how much space she was allowed to occupy. For about 5 minutes, I still wanted to sign. I wanted it badly enough that I picked up the pen. I imagined my name on the wall. I imagined Grandpa seeing both grandchildren in the succession photograph. I imagined no family group messages, no relatives choosing sides, no employees wondering whether they'd have jobs by winter. The old version of me would have called that peace. It wasn't peace. It was another invoice with the description left blank. I put the pen down. This isn't a seat at the table, I said. It's a weight with my name on it. Mom's face hardened. So you'd rather see the store fail? I'd rather see it survive on true numbers. That may not be possible. Then it hasn't survived. You've just postponed finding out. Dad stood. Your grandfather built this for his family. Then why does being family only count when you need my signature? He didn't answer. I slid the proposal back. I'm coming to Grandpa's birthday because he invited me. I'm coming as his granddaughter. I will not present Evan, endorse a transition, explain away the card, or discuss the review. If the store needs a financial officer, hire one. If it needs capital, show a lender the real books. If it needs my silence, it doesn't need saving. It needs a witness. Mom shook her head. You've changed. I hope so. I left the lemon cookies on the desk. Outside, I sat in my car for almost half an hour and cried so hard my ribs hurt. Rejecting the offer didn't feel powerful. It felt like grief. I had spent most of my life waiting for my family to say, "We see what you did. You belong here too." They had finally said it. All I had to do was agree that the years before it had never happened. I called Grandpa from the parking lot. I said no, I told him. To what? I explained the offer. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Good." Then I got angry with him. Don't just say good. This is your store. These are your choices too. Everybody keeps acting like I'm supposed to decide whether 15 people keep their jobs. You're right. I don't want the company. I know. I wanted you to know I mattered to it. His voice softened. You mattered before the store, Dana. That should have comforted me. Instead, it broke something open. Then why didn't anybody act like it? Grandpa was quiet. Because I let your father tell me what you wanted, he said. And because it was easier to believe you were fine than to ask whether you were hurt. No defense. No story about being old. No request that I understand his intentions. Just the truth. I'm sorry, he said. I believed him. The party happened Saturday. Riverglass Lodge sits above the river in a grove of pine trees. The dining room has tall windows, a stone fireplace, and the kind of view that makes people forgive expensive chicken. Mom managed to preserve more of the event than I expected. There were 64 guests, cream tablecloths, white flowers, and a 3-tier cake decorated to look like stacked wooden crates. A local guitar player replaced the band. The hotel bar accepted a separate card from Dad. Rowan and I arrived together. She wore a dark green dress and held the portable record player in both hands. The birthday card was tucked beneath the ribbon. If this gets weird, she whispered as we crossed the lobby, we can leave, right? Any second you want. Even before cake? Let's not be reckless. She smiled. I needed that. The first person we saw was Aunt Lisa. She looked at me, then at Rowan, then became deeply committed to rearranging the place cards on a nearby table. Cousin Nate nodded without meeting my eyes. People knew some version of what had happened. You could tell by how suddenly polite they became. Mom approached in a navy dress with a headset microphone clipped to her waist. For one absurd second, she looked like she was coordinating a corporate retreat. You came, she said. Grandpa invited us. Her eyes dropped to Rowan's gift. He'll love that. I know, Rowan said. Mom flinched. Dad was near the fireplace talking to 2 longtime suppliers. He gave me a short nod. Evan came over and hugged Rowan. When he looked at me, he said, I told them to remove the display. Did they? He glanced toward a black curtain near the stage. I don't know. Of course they hadn't. Grandpa arrived 10 minutes later wearing a charcoal suit and a red tie. He walked in under his own power, ignored my mother's attempt to direct him toward the photographer, and came straight to Rowan and me. He hugged Rowan first. Is that what I think it is? He asked. You're supposed to be surprised. I'm 80. I can be surprised by the same thing more than once. Then he hugged me. He held on longer than usual. You okay? He asked. Ask me after the curtain comes down. He looked toward the stage. What curtain? That told me everything I needed to know. Dinner went almost normally. That was the strangest part. People ate salmon and roasted potatoes. Grandpa told a story about accidentally ordering 600 toilet seats in 1983. Rowan showed him how the record player worked. Aunt Lisa complimented my dress, as though she hadn't accused me of manipulating an elderly man 48 hours earlier. For a little while, I understood why my mother worked so hard to preserve appearances. Normal can feel like relief, even when it's rented by the hour. After the cake, Mom took the microphone. She spoke about Grandpa's work ethic, his generosity, and the store's place in the community. Most of it was true. That made the rest more dangerous. Dad joined her. Evan stayed at our table. Tonight isn't only about looking back, Dad said. It's also about protecting what Walter built for the future. Evan closed his eyes. My mother reached for the curtain cord. Grandpa set down his coffee. The curtain opened. There was the display. Grandpa, Dad, Evan. 3 generations. 1 future. My parents had added a narrow portrait of me near the bottom right corner. It looked like a correction made after printing. Dad held up a leather presentation case. We'd like Walter to make official what this family has been building toward for years. Grandpa didn't stand. He looked at the display for a long time. Then he asked, who paid for that? Dad's hand lowered. That's not really the point. It is to me. Grandpa looked around the room. Dana's card paid the deposit. She didn't approve it. She wasn't invited either. I didn't ask for that. Nobody gasped. Aunt Lisa stopped cutting her cake. One supplier set his glass down. Mom reached for the microphone, but Grandpa held out his hand. And I already gave Tom $23,000 for this party. That money went into the store. Dad said, we should discuss this privately. Grandpa looked at the sign again. Private is what you called it when only the people paying weren't allowed to know. Then he pointed to the leather case. I'm not signing that. There's no transfer. The company books are under independent review, and no one speaks for me anymore. Evan stood. Dad, he said, did you know Dana never got equity? My father didn't answer. Evan walked out. Mom stared at the carpet. Dad closed the case. I didn't make a speech. I took Rowan's hand and asked Grandpa if he wanted to open his gift. He did. 3 months later, the disputed charges were permanently removed from my account. The store closed the contractor division, surrendered the extra warehouse, and refinanced under an outside manager. Dad stepped back from finances. Mom lost signing authority. Evan stayed in sales on a salary, without the promised transfer. The review documented $36,000 the company clearly owed me. I accepted a secured repayment note. Some older money couldn't be proved. I let that part become tuition. Grandpa kept his shares and rewrote his estate plan with independent advice. He didn't give me the store. I didn't want it. He made the eventual division transparent, which mattered more. Evan and I are rebuilding slowly. My parents and I have limited contact. Dad still calls the review an overreaction. Mom apologized for how everything felt, which is not the same as apologizing for what she did. Forgiveness, when it comes, won't automatically include account access. On Grandpa's 81st birthday, 11 of us ate barbecue in my backyard. Rowan played one of his jazz records. Nobody made a presentation. Nobody announced a legacy. While helping me clear the garage, Grandpa noticed the old brass store key hanging above my workbench. "Still doesn't open anything," he said. "I know. For years, I kept that key because I thought belonging meant being useful enough to be let back in. Now it hangs over a workbench that's mine, in a house where my daughter never has to calculate the cost of her seat. The key doesn't open their door anymore. I don't need it to."